Hello everyone, my name is Sam Cantori and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, 30-Minute Training Importing Files into Vulcan. Your host today is Fred Bushy. Fred is a mining engineer with our Technical Services Group and provides consulting and training services to the North American region. A few things before we get started. First, today's webinar will conclude with a question and answer session, so please feel free to write your questions in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, you will receive a link to a recording of this webinar by email in case you'd like to see it again. It will also be available on the Maptek website at a later date. I'll now hand it over to Fred.
Thank you, Sam. Hello, everyone. My name is Fred Bushy. I'm a certified professional engineer in the state of Colorado. I've worked with Maptek for the last 3 years, as Sam said, in the Technical Services Group, and before that I worked in open pit mine engineering, both with the Cripple Creek and Victor Gold Mine and with the consulting company Marson & Marson. So we'll move on to our agenda for today. We're going to look at importing a DXF and a DWG file type into Vulcan, both points, design data, and triangulations. Then we're going to look at importing ASCII file as design data. We're going to look at how to quickly import CSV data samples in particular into an ISIS database. We're going to look at how to import ASCII data into a block model, and we're going to look at importing Whittle results into a block model as well. So let's get on to the action. So first thing we're going to do is import DXF. So if we go to File and then Import, we'll want to choose on the left side of the panel here the AutoCAD type. And then we're going to choose this top option every time. You can see below here there's two other options for DXF. These are older menu options, and the only reason they aren't deprecated is because we have clients who still use these in scripts. So I always recommend using this top option. So if I click OK, you can see on the left side of the panel here I've got a couple of different file types that match what this panel is expecting, so I can import these files. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this file cont_lines.dxf. I'm going to use this arrow to move it over into the selected files area, and then if I click OK, you can see that the data has been imported into Envisage. You'll notice that the import panel recurses just like many Vulcan functions do. To get rid of it, I can either click here on cancel or I can just right click. So now you can see my line string data from my DXF has been imported. I'm going to just remove that data so we can continue looking at importing other types. So if I go back to File Import and back to the same option, AutoCAD and then DXF, one thing that you may have noticed before is that there's this additional options tab on the panel. So there's a couple things that I want to show you in this options tab that I think are pretty useful. So I imported that data into this store import.dgd.isis, but if I wanted to import it into a different layer, or a different DGD rather than the one that I had open, I can check on this box that says load layer straight into a DGD, and I can specify a different DGD. So I'm going to call this one import_Fred. Now if I click OK, you can see that the data has been imported into another DGD called import_Fred.dgd.isis. So moving on to DWG, it's a very similar process. If I go to File, Import, and then again click on AutoCAD and Design Strings, Grids, Triangulations. Okay. This time instead I'll just pick a DWG instead of a DXF. Move it over to the right hand side. Click OK. Again, the panel recurses. So you can see that this data has been brought in, and if I actually click on this data, you might notice that it's in two different layers. I have a layer called bound, and I have a layer called December 21st, 2012. So people who work with DWGs commonly probably know that occasionally they might have many layers. So if you don't want all those layers to be imported into Vulcan, if you just want all the data to be imported into a single layer, then you can use the Options tab that I showed you to do that. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to remove this data from the screen. So if I go back to File, Import, click on the option again, click OK. I'm going to grab my DWG, move it over into the Selected Files area. So this checkbox about halfway down the panel here, it says Load Objects into a Single Layer. So if I check this on, then I can just have a single layer. I'm going to nominate the name as DWG_single. Okay. And now you'll notice that all the data is stored in one layer called DWG single. Okay, so what if you want to import a triangulation from a DXF? Very similar process again. If I go to File, Import, again I'm going to click on AutoCAD and then Design Strings, Grids, Triangulations. I just pick my DXF that contains the triangulation data, in this case triangulation.dxf, move it over into the Selected Files area, click OK. In this case, I already have this triangulation in here, so I'm going to go ahead and override it. Now you can see the triangulation data that was in the DXF is now a vulcan.oot file, and it's in my project. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to importing ASCII. So similar process again. I'm going to go to File, Import, and a lot of the things that we're going to look at today are going to come from the File Import menu. This time I'm going to select ASCII and Design Strings. The data that I'm importing is point data, but you can also import line string data, other ASCII type data. File encoding I wouldn't worry about. I would just leave the defaults. So if I'm importing a single file, I have to use the Browse button to nominate that file. So in this case, it's called import.asc. I need to pick a layer name for the objects that it's going to create, so I'll just call it ASCII. This is character separated data, but you do need to know a little bit about the data that you're importing. Most of the time, though, you can import 99% of files, I would say, with character separated data disposition type. So if I click OK, I have to enter a separating character for the fields. This one happens to be a space, so I can just type in a space. You can see it gives you a little bit of instruction here on the side. And then I need to know the field numbers for the fields. I happen to know that this is how it's set up, 2, 3, and 4 for X, Y, and Z, and then the name field is in the first column. You could pretty quickly identify this type of information if you just open up the ASCII in like a text editor. So like I said, this data happens to be points, so I'm going to use load objects at points. If I go ahead and click Finish, I can save the specification. So if I'm going to be importing the same file type, like maybe it's a survey file, over and over, I can just save the specification and call it like survey import. And then the next time I can actually just pick this specification instead of filling out the field. So if I click OK, again, we get the panel to recurse. So if I click out of here, you can see that my ASCII points have been brought into Envisage. Okay, so let's take a look at importing some CSV data into a ISIS database. In this case, it's going to be a samples database. So again, I'm going to go back to File, Import. For file format, I'm going to select CSV databases, and I'm going to select the databases type, similar to drill hole database import, if anyone's ever done that. I'm going to go ahead and I have to create a specification name, so I'll just call this samples_import. Output setup, if I have a DSF file, database architecture design that I want to use, I can go ahead and use one. I'm just going to let Vulcan create one on the fly. So I'm going to call mine Fred_samples.smp. That's going to be the name of my ISIS database. For my input files, I have to have two files for a samples database. The group file is going to be the header. Basically, it's just going to contain the header information for the database. The entry file is going to contain my actual data. So I'm going to nominate group as the header table. And then here you can see this is the type of data that's in my group file. So I have composite ID, composite type, date, time, and description. Composite ID is going to be what I index on. And then the entry table has more fields in it, but actually the only column that's populated in this database is the AU column. So by default, Vulcan does a pretty good job of identifying these things, so I would say most of the time I don't mess with them. I just double check afterwards to make sure everything looks okay. So if I click OK, it's finished, so I get the panel to recurse. I'm going to right click out of here. If I go into ISIS, I'll go ahead and open up that fredsamples.smp.isis, and you can see my group table doesn't really contain much data, just the composite ID. And then in my entry fields, I have the mid-X, mid-Y, mid-Z points, and my AU column was the only one that was populated, like I said. So pretty easy to go from just having mid-X, Y, Z and some data to creating a samples ISIS database that you can now view both in ISIS and in Envisage. So if we go back to Envisage, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to look at importing an ASCII into a block model. So I have a block model in my data set, this BM50by50.BMF, and I want to import some ASCII data that I have. It's just an integer field. So first thing I need to do is add a variable. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and do add variable. I'm just going to call it import underscore int because it's an integer. I'm going to select integer as the data type. Default value -99 is fine. Under the description, I'll just say geology integer flag import. Okay. It's going to ask me if I want to add that variable to my BMF. I say yes. So right now you can see now I have this import int, which is just basically a blank variable in my block model file. So if I want to populate that variable with information that I have in an ASCII file, I can go ahead and go to block, transfer, import attributes. So here again I have to nominate a specification file name, so I'll just call mine import. I'm going to pick the block model that I want to import into. This import underscore geo underscore int dot ASCII is the file name that I'm going to import, but you can pick from a list of text files that are in your current workspace. And my favorite variable connection mode, I think the easiest, is to use this by column name. So basically I'm going to just select the variable from each of the files that I want to match up. So in this instance, line number containing field names is 1, which is going to be true of any ASCII or CSV file that has header information. And then line number where records start, I have 2 because I only have a 1-line header, so my information starts on line 2. So the variable in the block model that I want to populate is called import underscore int. I just created it. And the field in the ASCII file is called geology. So if I go ahead and click OK, you can see the T-shell pops up and shows me the number of blocks inserted. That happens to be the number of blocks in my block model. Okay. So last thing that we're going to look at here is how to import from Whittle results into Vulcan. So I'm going to switch real quick to a different data set. Very similarly, I have a model here called top_small2.bmf. I'm going to create a variable to import the information into. I'm going to call it Whittle underscore pit. Again, I'm going to make this an integer. For the default value, I'm going to make this 501 just as a standard for bringing in optimization results. So I'm going to call this Whittle optimization pit results in the description. If I click OK, the panel recurses, right click, it's going to ask me if I want to modify the block model. Say yes. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to File Import. And I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. There should be one there called Whittle 4X. I'm going to pick block models, it's the only type, and click OK. So when you're importing into Whittle, two things that you have to have or importing Whittle into Vulcan rather, two things that you have to have are a Whittle parameters file and a Whittle results file. So first things first, I want to nominate the block model that I want to bring the information into. Choose the parameters file. Choose the results file. And then I'm going to put the default number from my variable into the default pit number. And then I want to select the variable that I'm going to use, which in this case was Whittle pit. So if I click OK, again the shell launch and import some blocks. Press any key to continue. So now if I want to just quickly verify that, I'm going to right click on my models to do perform block viewing blocks. I can pick that. Oh, somehow I got switched over. Right click on my model, do block viewing blocks. I'm going to select Whittle pit as my variable name. I've already created a legend for the Whittle pit results, and it's the only one I happen to have in this project, so it's going to actually skip over that portion. And then you can see that it'll display the results of the pit optimization in Whittle in 3D on my screen. Okay, so just in summary, a couple things that we've looked at today. We heavily explored the file import functionality. File import AutoCAD is going to be useful for, DXFs, DWGs, both design and triangulation type data. File import ASCII. If you're bringing in ASCII or CSV data that is points or line strings. File import CSV databases is what we use for bringing in the samples database. You can also bring in drill hole databases that way. And then block transfer import attributes, that was what we used to import ASCII information into a block model that was already created, and file import Whittle 4X is what we use to bring in Whittle results into a Vulcan block model file. Does anyone have any questions?
As I mentioned before, please write in any questions through the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Let's see if we have any so far. Can I import something into Vulcan from MineSite, GemCom, or DataMine?
Good question, Sam. So if we go back to our file import menu, you can see that we have many file formats from a lot of our competitors and other GMP softwares. So the answer is yes. Most of them are pretty simple, like I'll describe MineSite, for example. Depending on whether you have a design string or triangulation MSR file, you can just go ahead and click OK, and it's very similar to the AutoCAD. You'll just nominate the file, move it over to the other side, and click OK.
Great, thanks Fred. We have one more question. What should I do if I am trying to import a file and I get stuck?
Excellent question. So anytime that you're trying to import a file and you're having problems and you don't know what to do, I would just say you can give our technical services department a call here in Denver. The number is 303-763-4919, or you can visit our website, www.maptek.com, and click on support.
Thanks, Fred. We're nearing the end of our time today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to contact Fred directly or email support@maptek.com. On behalf of the entire Maptek team, thank you for attending. We hold a different webinar each month, so please visit maptek.com to view the entire schedule. Thank you and have a great day.